this installment of the Halloween vlog, I go to Howl-O-Scream Tampa. I believe this is the 4th year that I've gone. This event is in the vein of a lot of other theme park haunts, Halloween Horror Nights being the easiest thing to compare it to, but Howl-O-Scream definitely has its own flavor, its own style, particularly that they have a lot more like scare actors throughout the park. The whole park is very dark, so it definitely has a very unique mood and a very creepy mood. They also don't have like the IP houses that a place like Universal does, so they are all original designs. And the other unique thing with them is that they tend to bring back a lot of houses year after year with some tweaks. So I believe only one house this year was completely new from the ground up, and most of the others were expanding upon or redos of previously seen houses. So for Howl-O-Scream Tampa, you can actually get into the park at 4 o'clock. The event does not start till 7, and the park itself closes for everybody else at 6. I believe in previous years when I'd gone in, they had done something to the effect of like corralling people for Howl-O-Scream in certain areas. I may be misremembering this. Like you can kind of go around the park until 6 and they stuck you in another location while they made the transition. This time you were kind of able to just roam freely from what I saw. So I think this is the one last year that I didn't get good video of because it's so freaking dark. There's like Mothman and like shadow shapes and stuff, but you'd never know at night. It's right next to friggin' Elbow. It's just a weird juxtaposition of hearing Muppet music or Sesame Street or whatever in the middle of what's supposed to be a scare zone. It's kind of hilarious. It's pretty deadly. This is clearly Nosferatu.
We only have one person in and he gets so stressed out.
That's really sick. The park's just killing it with scarecrow themes this year, I guess. But there is like a downtime even before 6 o'clock where things are shutting down. So I kind of got into a point where like there weren't a lot of rides to go on. There wasn't even like a lot of food offerings available during a certain bit of time. So I don't know if going in early was really worth it. In the past, they used to have like scare actors out early, especially outside the park. I think since COVID, they have not brought those back. So it is like a little less reason to get there early, I guess. The only plus side for me is that I went straight to the back of the park to do one of the houses there, so that I kind of got that more or less, you know, not to myself, but a smaller number of people in there with me. I was one of the first groups through the house itself and got to make sure I had a shorter line because I did not get an express pass for this. This was all just regular standby. Granted, I will say I didn't wait more than maybe about half an hour for any house. This was on a Friday night. The other cool thing for this year is I found when I was checking their bag policy on their website that you're allowed to film in the houses as long as you don't have like an exterior light shining. I don't know if this is new or if this has always been there and I just didn't know about it, but I'll actually get to show you all of the houses and scare zones in this video rather than just the scare zones like normal. I think this must be new because these signs that they had out outside of everything said no filming, but the signs also looked like they were very clearly written during like COVID era because it talked about wearing a mask is recommended and stuff. But I had the camera out every time I was going into the house. I wasn't trying to sneak the camera in. It was very obvious I was filming and nobody said a damn thing to me. So cool. So the first house up was The Residence, Home for the Holidays. This is a re-theme of a previously existing house that they've had, I believe, for the last 2 years, now with a Christmas overlay. Didn't expect to be starting off my Halloween event with Christmas, but here we go. Outside, there was like an SUV with a Christmas tree on top and some general Christmas decorations and music. As you went inside the building, you were technically outside of the house of the residents. There were like some snowmen and Christmas decorations around. As you go in, you see a mutilated body right off the start. Then you start having members of the house popping out at you. There are like blueprints and things up on the walls. You see victims being tortured amongst flashy Christmas lights. Honestly, with the music blaring and all the screams, it's a lot of chaos. You end up in a kitchen where there's somebody mutilating a body as well. Then you start moving through the various rooms of the house, like a living room. You see a kitchen table where a body is being eaten by a bunch of the residents. Bedrooms where people are milling around doing crazy stuff. The disgusting bathroom from last year is back with the massive daisy-chained electrical outlets and the filthy toilet, which now makes a noise when you go past it. Eventually you head into the backyard of the house, which I believe they did last year as well, going through various bits of laundry and stuff, and there's more Christmas decorations and snow effects. You see various people in cages tied up with Christmas lights. And then you see a disgusting, I don't know if he's supposed to be Santa, it was an old man on a toilet burping and farting. Honestly, kind of reminded me more of Otis from Devil's Rejects than he did Santa. But I kind of feel like he's supposed to be a Santa type figure. Then as you get to the end of the house, there is a jumping actor getting in your face, and then several chainsaw-wielding maniacs hidden amongst Christmas trees. And you're back outside and heading back into the park. The first scare zone isn't really a true scare zone. They list on their site that there's hidden scare zones, and they always have kind of had like roving mobs and things throughout the park. One of the things I love the most about Howl-O-Scream is that you really don't have just these defined areas where the haunts are happening. You can kind of run into things pretty much anywhere in the park, which I really like compared to like Universal, where there do tend to be stretches where it's just business as usual throughout the park. So one of the more defined one of these hidden scare zones is Crash Test Clowns, which is really actually more of a ride than it is a scare zone, but the outside is themed with a bunch of scare actor clowns, some normal looking deranged clowns, some on stilts. There is like a VW bug all painted up that has like a jump scare thing with the horn going off. There's a couple like ticket booths rigged up with like creepy clown props inside. I don't think they were playing it all the time, but the first time I went through, they were blasting like some metal music and stuff. It was kind of a cool look. Not big on scary clowns, but I think it worked for what it was. But the main attraction is, this is where the bumper cars in the park are, and you can actually ride the bumper cars with at least one evil clown in the mix. So in our go through, there was only one clown actor. It ended up getting into the car like right behind me. I want to say in previous years when I did this, they had like smoke and stuff pumping through this, but it was kind of more or less regularly lit. Maybe a couple like purpley lights going on, and then the clown. It wasn't as much craziness as before, though I think last time I did it, it was zombies and not clowns. Not really a whole lot to say about this. It's bumper cars with an evil clown. It is funny, like, to have bumper cars where there is, like, a target for people to go after, instead of it just being pure chaos, though, you know, people do just crash into one another, either for the hell of it or on accident. The first official scare zone I went into was Skeleton Crew. This is another returning one with a pirate theme. First time I went through was during the day, so everything was lit, you know, kind of like normal. Costumes were definitely interesting. People seem to really get into the pirate thing. It is Tampa, so, I mean, there is a big pirate theme in Tampa just in general, so I'm sure it's kind of easy to find scare actors that are willing to play pirates, but the costumes are pretty well done. You kind of go through various wooden structures.
Oh, rip your eyes and I suck and say call home and spread the chili all over.
There's like a stone kraken coming out of the ground at one point. There's a big like monster head coming out of a shack that's kind of cool. There's one pirate that both times I went through was yelling something about eyelids, and I don't know if there's supposed to be an overarching thing about eyelids throughout all this, but that was kind of an interesting thing to hear. When I went back through at night, it was a little lamer in the front part of it. Like, there were a lot of the pirate actors around a small child, and then people taking photos on one of the, like, pirate throne things. So a lot of the actors were kind of preoccupied for a bit, which kind of made going through it a little lame. There was some cool lighting effects, like a pirate in a cage with like a blue ghostly light behind him. It's kind of a Davy Jones looking Kraken pirate, which is kind of cool. One of the few that had like an actual mask on. And then I walked into a section where there was like 3 of them almost blocking my path, which was kind of cool. I feel like in haunted houses or scare zones, you don't normally have like multiple actors on you at once, so that was kind of a neat scare.
Your eyelids.
Next up is The Forgotten, another returning house from last year. The lead up to this house is really nice because once you're out of the line, there's kind of this walkthrough that's actually supposed to be heading back towards one of the ride areas. So it's a very like natural looking area, a lot of stone around, but then you start encountering some like fencing and restricted area, keep out signs, and move into a cave. Inside the cave, you can see some skeletons and things about the vampires that are in this house. And then you head through some fog, back through some more rocks. And I was greeted by a scare actor there, waving me into the house. There's some abandoned bikes and stuff outside kind of a sewer entrance. And he walked in ahead of me. I was first in line. And he kind of disappeared on me and jumped out at me, which was great. So going through, first you're starting off in this kind of sewer area. Being first in line, I had people jumping out at me from every angle. It was kind of great. Then you're into a kind of Victorian style house. People are jumping out of portrait frames. There's lots of kind of sexy vampire paintings on the walls and stuff. As you go in, there's some kind of S&M stuff going on. And you can hear people's like muffled cries from beyond the bondage. You walk into a big room with a piano playing vampire, which is kind of cool. Then you walk into a room with a vampire on a throne with a bunch of like vampire slaves, or I guess probably human slaves. And then you walk back out kind of into the sewer section again.
Upon your blood.
And then you're back out into the cave area. Next up was Raven's Mill. This is one that I went through both before it even opened, once in the daylight, and then once at night. So coming from the direction I was going, which was counterclockwise around the park, you're kind of heading up a ramp that has some of these details. The lower part of the ramp doesn't have too much, and the upper part does. I gotta say, I'm actually surprised they have like scarecrows more or less on crucifixes. Figured somebody would get offended over that, but that's how they had them up there. Scarecrows look nicely detailed, like they were creepy without being over the top. Another one of those sections too, where Busch Gardens does some like lighting and fog effects onto things that are just there normally during park operation that I think actually work really well to help add to the creep factor. So going up the ramp, there's kind of these boxes with corn coming out, and each one has like a scarecrow on top. So they create blind areas where scare actors can kind of hide behind things. They also have another full-size windmill, similar to what Halloween Horror Nights did. I actually think I kind of like this one better. It's more robust looking and much creepier looking. And they have some larger structures here as well, like a couple little shacks. They have some crates and things out. There are more kind of box sections hiding different actors and stuff. They had some cool ones, like ones that looked like they were just dummy props that would actually jump off the wall and growl at you. One of those two shacks, I don't think anything ever really was happening at it. But the other one had like jack-o'-lanterns and chainsaws and like a rotating human head being cooked inside, which looked pretty cool. Some nice theming.
Nice collection.
As you continue down this path, there is a covered bridge. The lead up to the covered bridge had some actors on stilts, one with like a creepy pumpkin head on it. And another more traditional one, but he actually had like the cross behind him that he was hanging up on. As you go through the tunnel, it's full of jack-o'-lanterns and stuff hanging from the ceiling. There's more scarecrows down the sides of it. This has been kind of themed before, but usually just more with like lights and a little bit of decorations. I don't think it's ever been part of a scare zone at the time I've been at the event, so I really like that they did this. On the other side, we still have some more of the box structures with some scare actors hiding in the shadows. Very, very dark over there. There were times I was looking right at a scare actor and couldn't tell. And then it gets to the point of this path where it gets a little steeper, and that's basically where they cut off the scare zone. There's like an aviary in the middle there. And if you were coming from this direction, you initially would have been greeted by this very large scarecrow jack-o'-lantern creature coming out of the corn. So Another nice little touch. This is one of those scare zones where I feel like you get a different experience depending on which direction you walk through it, and I'm all about that. That's really nice to see. The next scare zone is in the shadows, another one I did basically 3 times. Once before the park opened, once in the light, and once in the dark. This one I remember in previous years being really dark, like to the point where you could barely see anything on film. So this year it seemed like it was a little brighter lit, but I think they did a really cool job with it, playing with the light. They had these silhouetted cardboard cutouts to like look like monsters kind of back into the wooded areas. They had some actors that were just kind of various ghouls or whatever, a lot of face paint and shabby looking clothes. But then they had these cool things where they use like bits of morph suits, and I wouldn't think morph suits would work for a haunt like this, but like one guy had just the mask on with some like painted on face, and it was actually really creepy looking. And then there were a couple other actors that were just in full body morph suits that were just, they worked. It worked as a shadow creature going through. Honestly, a lot of this seemed to be based on creepypasta kind of stuff. I believe one of the silhouette, actually it wasn't even a silhouette, it was like a full statue, was supposed to be like that siren head thing. There were definitely some heavy, like, Slender Man, Marble Hornets kind of things going on here. But they also had, like, a Mothman statue, which I thought was kind of cool. They did also have some stilt walkers that were very Slender Man-esque as well. I don't know. The entire concept might be a bit derivative of kind of pop culture horror stuff at the moment, or maybe even not at the moment, maybe a few years back, but I think it actually worked really well this year. Our next house is Witch of the Woods. This was my favorite house last year. This starts out with you walking outside, kind of a winding path leading up to the house. The first time I did this, it was in somewhat still daylight, but when I went back later at night, it was super dark and much creepier. Through some of the first sections of the twists and turns, there are some actors hidden in the bushes, dressed as bushes, making noise and freaking people out. You then come up to a shack that has a scare actor in it. And then you get to the actual entrance. There's like an area, it looks like somebody was digging up a grave nearby. And then you pass into the actual building itself. You start off with like a sacrifice scene. There's somebody up on a podium talking, and then a bunch of cultists around a kind of vat. And one of them is actually a scare actor, and the others are mannequins. And as you go, you kind of move in and out of smaller buildings. So some bits you'll be outside or in little pathways with like trellises on the walls that they use flags and things to kind of block your line of sight. And then you'll end up in other sections that look more like they're interior buildings. Lots of kind of skull and occult looking decorations throughout, kind of medieval weapons and things. And the village honestly kind of reminds me of like a Pirates of the Caribbean style thing, like that kind of area and era of building. One of my favorite sections is a part where it's kind of a narrow walkway, and there are two scare actors on either side coming out of the walls, kind of attacking you or whatever. And you go through some tight corners and things where there's various bits of buildings of actors coming out of them and stuff. Then you end up in an exterior looking section with like a tree with like glowing energy going through it, and another shack. Inside that shack there are a lot of like animal pelts, and it looks like they're basically trying to skin both animals and humans in there. Then you get outside and there's another like bungee actor jumping out at you. And some like mannequins of dark hooded figures. And as you go around the corner, you're essentially back in the rest of the park. The Junkyard is another returning scare zone. It honestly feels a bit like a mini house because it is so separated from the rest of the park. Most of the other scare zones are on the main paths that you have to walk. This is actually kind of in its own little loop off to the side of the front entrance. So it's completely optional if you wanted to avoid it, but why would you? You're going to a haunt event, you should be enjoying all this stuff. The Junkyard is what the name implies. It is a lot of bits and pieces of previous houses and scare zones kind of all thrown together to create its own thing. So it has a very Junkyard feel. A lot of stuff just looks like trash. There's a lot of flashing lights. We get the Motel Hell sign back, which I love. Honestly, this hasn't changed much since last year that I can remember. It has a lot of the same kind of random junk thrown around. But I think it really works, like in terms of a concept. It's cool. Because of the way it's shaped and how it is, I kind of forget sometimes it is a scare zone, that I don't have to just like walk through it like I would a house. You can kind of enjoy it a little more, but I don't know, it kind of works to move through it like a house as well. It's kind of fun just to look and try to think where all the random bits of garbage came from. So the event's been open not even an hour really, like for the actual Howl-O-Scream event. And I already got like 3 houses and 3 scare zones down. So that's out of 5, I believe. So we're moving right through stuff. Definitely gonna go back and do some things once it's like dark. It's not even fully dark yet. But it's been good, like 3 for 3 on the houses this year. The scare zones have been pretty solid so far. Excited to see where it goes from here. The next house may get the award for the longest name of any haunted house I have seen in a while. Deathwater Bayou, Blood Moon, the final phase. This is a massive evolution of the Deathwater Bayou house. It used to just be Deathwater Bayou. It had kind of a voodoo theme. Last year they introduced the Blood Moon part of this, which is now that basically werewolves have kicked the voodoo worshippers out of their swamp. And I assume final phase means that they're reaching the end of this, and maybe they'll be doing a different house next year. Not really sure about that part, but yeah, the final phase. So the exterior of this house hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. You go into this very Louisiana voodoo looking building, kind of an old rundown wooden building. There's a scare actor outside kind of beckoning you in.
Into the bayou you go. Beware of the rougarous.
This is another one where I was in the front of the line more or less, so I got all the scares right up in my face. So you kind of walk into almost like a voodoo gift shop, like a Marie Laveau's kind of place. And then you get sent into the deeper sections of it, like the actual like voodoo practitioner areas, I guess. Come on. And then sent down a section where you can pick one of 2 spinning tube tunnels that are voodoo themed. Very disorienting. And then you get into the forest. So you have very dim lighting in there. And then you start seeing werewolves. Maybe the first one you see is actually somebody starting to transform into a wolf from a human. Then you go into a cemetery section, which used to be really cool in the voodoo stuff, but now it's just kind of another place to hide some wolf actors. And then deeper and deeper into the woods themselves. Like a lot of like werewolf themed houses, this one uses some people in costumes and some animatronic bits. Then you end up back outside the building you went into, next to like a trailer, and honestly, that house was so dark, I don't know if any of my footage is actually going to be usable, but it was still fun. And the last actual house for the event was Strangelwood Estate. The exterior of this place was heavily themed to look like an old Gothic manor that had kind of been eaten away by time and nature, basically reclaiming it. Very cool theming, really nice looking area. Lots of smoke pumping through. And once again, I was front of the group for this one. So you go in right through the front doors of the house, and there's somebody down this lower section, but also a ghostly figure upstairs from you. And this is almost like a less club-looking version of The Forgotten. It is basically going through an old Gothic house. So a lot of similar effects of things, but just in a more run-down style, I guess. There's hallways you're going through with a bunch of portraits, and some of the portraits give way to actors behind them screaming at you. Some of the rooms are actually pretty nicely sized, like they actually have them set up to be looking like very large spaces that makes it feel more like an actual mansion.
This is sick!
Sure, why not?
You will never experience
There's a section where they tell you could walk or crawl. I took the laneway and decided to walk. It's been a while since I've seen a house with that kind of option, or at least that I've been aware of, so that's kind of cool. This is one of the few houses without kind of a lead out at the end. So once it ends, you're kind of right into like the midway section of the Egypt part of the park. So it does kind of break the immersion almost immediately, but not a big deal. Beyond the Veil is, I believe, a new scare zone for this year. Rather than being like strictly horror themed, this was a little more fantasy themed, like dark fantasy, I guess. The decorations in it were very blacklight reactive, so they had a glow to it. They had some fog, but also the fog bubbles that I've seen in a lot of videos for like Halloween trade shows. It's kind of cool. The costumes in it, I think, might have been a little weaker because they were just going for this weird like fairy goblin thing, but it looked kind of more like it was something you'd see at a weird Halloween dance club thing. The lighting is definitely different than a lot of the other areas, being very, very neon, bright pinks and greens and blues.
What are you doing? I want to hide in your beard.
Hello, friends. I like that shirt. Have fun.
Look, it's the Hank Hill scare zone. Next up is Voodoo. I was confused because Voodoo was not far from Deathwater Bayou last year because they are linked scare zones, or scare zone in the house, really. So I was surprised to see it moved as far away as it was. The idea of this being that when the Voodoo practitioners were kicked out of the Deathwater Bayou house by the werewolves, they moved to this new scare zone. So it was very similar to last year, a lot of like little shack buildings, with various voodoo practitioners in them. One of the highlights is a giant voodoo doll kind of statue thing in the middle of it. Some of the actors this year were actually dressed as voodoo dolls, which I think was kind of a cool idea that I don't think they had last year. The statue looks like it's smaller than the one before. The one before was in a very large area and just felt massive. This one felt a little smaller. For all I know, it may be the exact same thing again, but it just didn't look as impressive where it was. And overall, I feel like that's the whole thing with this scare zone. It was nice, but after seeing how big it was last year, it just was a little bit of a letdown because it felt so expansive last year. And one that you could just kind of wander around and really enjoy as opposed to a more linear, standard scare zone this year. The last scare zone for the night was the Shortcut, another returning one that I always kind of forget about in previous years because it's tucked away in the backside of the park, usually one that I don't hit until the very end when I'm really exhausted. Honestly, it was kind of the same here this time as well, but this time I was looking for it, and it's a really cool theme. They have like a hearse outside and some like burnt out looking church buildings. They have kind of evil nuns and kind of very Victorian looking costumes for a lot of the characters. I love the lighting on it because they do use some black light to kind of illuminate the whites on the nuns' robes. There's some kind of tombstone crypt elements going on. There's a little graveyard section that's fenced off that had an actress walking through that just looked creepy as all hell. And another one where walking through different directions kind of helped. I actually went through the little church section a couple times just because I wanted to make sure I was seeing everything. It looked so neat. There was like a dead priest and maybe his like altar boys or something, like skeletons still wearing the clothes and everything. The hearse has been there for years, it seems. I feel like it's there every Howl-O-Scream. And honestly, I think the Shortcut used to be a much kind of less involved scare zone, like one of the non-official ones. We're just gonna be like some graveyard people in the hearse walking around doing the sparking stuff, but they really have expanded it and made it much cooler. They're playing some recordings of like somebody praying, but then it would get more and more distorted as it went on. This other section was another split area of the path. There was some kind of crypt stuff in the middle, and these almost ghostly figures, just characters dressed head to toe in white with their faces obscured, looking really cool, really creepy. Some large like cemetery gates outside as well. A large like memorial stone. This one guy doing this really cool kind of fry croaking noise that reminded me of a cross between the Predator and E.T., which doesn't sound scary, but it was. More like fake mausoleums and stuff going through, with more of the ghostly figures kind of in between them.
Ashes to ashes.
And then when you look back at it from the other side, it looks like you're going into a cemetery. So the burnt out church from one side, the cemetery gates from the other. I think it's really cool to set it up that way. So I've got to say, this was a fantastic event. I hate that I always compare it to Halloween Horror Nights, but, you know, that's the big dog, so it's kind of easy to make those comparisons. And I think I had more fun at this than I did at Halloween Horror Nights. You get more at Halloween Horror Nights because, you know, there's more houses, there's double the number of houses, and I think roughly the same number of scare zones. But I paid like $30 plus some fees for my tickets when I got them relatively early on in the season, and let's just say Halloween Horror Nights is many times more expensive than that. So ranking the houses was really difficult for me because I liked almost all of them. Like, I really had a fantastic time through pretty much all of them. It's funny because I made a list and I was thinking, looking at this list, that I needed to make a quick change on here. So my number 5 spot, my bottom spot, which is not a bottom spot really, I'm going to say is Deathwater Bayou, insert way longer name here. It wasn't bad. I liked that house. I still like that house. It's been cool every time I've gone through it. But I realized that the house I originally had ranked at the bottom, I had more like memories as time went on. Like, there were more things in that house that stood out to me. And Deathwater Bayou was really just kind of a blur to me this year. So not bad, just, you know, it just didn't stick in my head as much. And I think that, you know, says something about it. So my number 4 spot is going to be The Residence. Originally I ranked this lower, but I think that might be my prejudice against having Christmas at Halloween. So I think once I get past that factor, it did have some cool scares. It did have some great set design in there. Overall, a very nicely done house. Number 3 was The Forgotten. I don't remember liking this house very much last year, and I don't know if it's because I was in the front of the group when I went through and got the crap scared out of me around every corner, or if they fixed it up a little bit. I feel like they made some improvements in there of just kind of making it feel more themed out or whatever. But I really like this house this year. It was a lot of fun. As much as it pains me to do it, number 2 is Witch of the Woods. My favorite house last year. I just felt like I had 2 bad runs through that house this year. Not bad necessarily. It's the only house I did twice. I had intended to do another house a second time, but I just wasn't able to do it that night. But I feel like if I could have gotten into a spot where I was first in the group for Witch of the Woods, I would have had a phenomenal time in it. And I did really enjoy the house again. Obviously, it's number 2 on this list, and I liked all the houses. But I feel like the people that were in front of me were getting a lot of the scares when I went through. And I got kind of that HHN experience where I was just in a bad place. I think that was compounded by the fact that both times I went through, the group in front of me were very nervous, very scared. And I think they honestly just felt like easier targets to go after, and I kind of got left in the dust a little bit. I tried to separate myself out from the people in front of me, but there's only so much you could really do. And number 1 is the new house, Strangelwood Estate. Super impressive. I love that they had like the full mansion feel. Really felt like you were walking through a house. There were plenty of places where I felt like I didn't even know where to go. There were just corridors, and I could have believed any of them were the correct direction. Lots of great jump scares, lots of just amazing theming. A couple years ago, this was the spot of one of my favorite houses. It was the Nightmare or whatever that was, the Freddy Krueger kind of thing. And last year I didn't care so much for the house in there, but they done another great one in this location again, and I really do hope it comes back next year. Honestly, out of the list, I think it would make sense if maybe Deathwater Bayou and The Residence got retired out and replaced, at least one of the two. The fact that Deathwater Bayou has Final Phase in the name makes me think that it's probably going to be the last year, but I haven't looked any further into that. I could just be speculating off the name. As for the scare zones, the bottom of my list is Beyond the Veil. Just not my thing. A little too cutesy, a little too weird. I don't know. Not a fan of that one. Once again, not bad. It just didn't appeal to me. Number 6 is the Junkyard. It's fine. It just feels like the same thing it was last year. And I think if they're going to keep it, they need to do something different with it. It's impressive looking. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's lacking a little something, and I don't know quite what it is. Number 5 is In the Shadows. I think they really improved the scare zone this time. I think the costumes they gave the actors were really cool looking, especially that morph suit thing and just how simple but creepy it was. I think they lit the silhouettes and stuff off to the side of the paths better so that they were more ominous looking and not just literally in the shadows. So I I really think this one stepped it up this time. Number 4 is Skeleton Crew. I could have gone back and forth between this and In the Shadows being in their places, but I think with this one I was impressed this year with how enthusiastic the scare actors seemed to be when they weren't huddling around children. I believe some of the new things were additions with like the giant monster head and some of the like more mutated pirates and stuff. I think they made this one a little bit cooler than it had been previously, so I'm ranking it a little bit higher. Number 3 is Voodoo. While I do feel like they downgraded it this year, I would have preferred it back where it was the first time and how expansive it was that first time. It was still a cool scare zone. I really like all the detail they put into it. I really like the theming of it and everything. I guess it's not a bad thing that I'm wishing it was more, but having given us more before, yeah, you can see where I'm coming from. Number 2 was Raven's Mill. Beautifully detailed. I liked where it was because I always felt that stretch of the park got boring. It's funny because Howl-O-Scream is all in the dark for the most part. So this was just kind of this big stretch of a ramp that was just dark and just nothing in previous years, where they would theme out the bridge maybe a little bit, but still a whole lot of nothing going on. And adding in this scare zone on this ramp and having all these cool like elevated bits to it, I think just really made it come to life and look really awesome. I think they had a cooler windmill than they had at Halloween Horror Nights. I don't know, did they do the scarecrows better? I think some of the masks they had in Orlando were cooler, but I think overall with like theming and I don't know, they might win this one. It's close. It is a close duel of the Scarecrow scare zones. And honestly, I feel at this point that somebody is trying to appease some corn god. But yeah, it was great. And that leaves for number 1, the shortcut. I just love how this looked. I love that it was visually different, whether you were going through it one direction or the other. I love that there were multiple parts where you kind of had to split off from the path and see different bits of it. I like that they used the side areas, they used the walkways, they made full use of that space that they had. It's not a super wide path, but they filled it with stuff and lit it incredibly well, and it was different elements. I think that's kind of what made it win out over everything else to me. And not to say that other scare zones didn't, but I think specifically is what elevated it over Raven's Mill to me was that it actually had more variety in the set pieces around. It wasn't just a whole lot of one thing repeated and then some unique structures in the middle. It was unique structures with other unique structures as you went in unique areas. So I think that's what makes it win out. It was phenomenal. And honestly, like, I liked all the houses. I liked all the scare zones, except really for Beyond the Veil. That was the only one that kind of fell flat for me. So that's a wrap on this year's Howl-O-Scream vlog. Assuming this hurricane doesn't completely wreck things, I should be heading to the SeaWorld one here shortly, probably about the time you're seeing this video. I'm excited to see what that one brings to the table this year. I'd have to say I highly recommend checking this thing out. If you are in the Central Florida area and you are interested in doing these kind of haunt things, I think it's worth taking an hour detour to go and do this event. It really is a lot of fun. It impresses me every year. And as I mentioned earlier, for the price that you can get tickets, especially if you get the early bird tickets that are around 31 bucks or so. But in general, it's significantly cheaper than getting a Halloween Horror Nights ticket. And I think they really try to do the same level that Halloween Horror Nights does. And honestly, it feels like older Halloween Horror Nights where it was less squeaky clean like it is now, which I think is one of the reasons I kind of butt heads with that event a little bit lately. I feel like for an event at a theme park, they're a little more willing to take some risks. You know, obviously they don't have the freedom that like an independent haunt might have in terms of what they can do, but I think they have enough budget to make things that are high quality while still not trying to make it for all ages. So yeah, if you haven't had a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it. So that's it for this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Later.